Good evening. Welcome to the February 26, 2014 Board of Education meeting. We're in executive session starting at 6 o'clock to discuss a personnel matter. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And do we have some participation in government students here this evening? Okay. Your requirement will be that you'll stay till at least 9 o'clock unless we get done earlier. We don't foresee that we'll be done earlier tonight. But if we go beyond 9, we'll stop at 9, give you a break, take a break, and at that time you can come up and sign out, and we can sign any sheets that you need signed. You're more than welcome to continue after 9 o'clock, but your only requirement is to stay at least till 9. Okay. We'll start with introductions.
Lynn Lenhart.
Joanne Cunningham. Kate Navarro. Jody Monroe.
Tom Douglas.
Matt Downey.
Michael Cooper.
Diane Stever.
Charmaine Ridgesinger.
And Judy Kehoe.
Item number 2, approval of the minutes of the January 22nd, 2014 regular board meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
That's a first and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any disapproval? Any abstentions? That carries. Next item is the Student Senate report. Hi, how you doing tonight? Good. You can use the microphone if you would, please.
He's about to get it for you.
Is that okay? There we go. A review of the Bethlehem Hockey Night. There were some problems getting the hooligans on the ice, logistics and stuff that we couldn't figure out in time. So we still got to sing the national anthem there. We had a student turn up. We had some people come. It was really nice. It was a great game, and they said they would be happy to have us in the future, and they're very excited about working with us more, especially with the hooligans, which is really awesome. It just took more time to set up than they planned, and so we still got the anthem in there. We still got students to show up, so it was a really good game. Right now we're in full swing with Mr. Bethlehem, which is coming up on March 14th, and we are setting up a rehearsal date to get everything approved, and we are right now having sign-ups, so every senior boy who's interested in signing up is signing up now. Other than that, we're working on getting the committee together for the student lounge that's being put into the cafeteria, trying to find out what the budget is for couches, like what we want the rules to be, what students expect from it, what students want from it, and how we can fit that in with expectations for them, which will be a really great thing to get people in the library more quiet and people in the lounge a place to do work but also hang out and talk with their friends, more like a college situation. So it's a really great thing, and we're really happy for the opportunity to work with Mr. Landry on that. And that's pretty much what we've been up to.
Anyone have
Have
any?
you ordered furniture yet?
No, we have to check everything with like fire codes and stuff like that and look at the budget. So we have a committee set up of students, representatives from each grade, not so much with the seniors, but more with sophomores and juniors especially, but 2 students from each grade working to figure out what they would like to see in the future. Thanks so much.
Anyone else? Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item is the superintendent's report. However, I think Tom is going to bypass that for your presentation.
Yeah,
So-
I'm going to bypass, but I'd just like to make one announcement because we've had 2 snow days. We want to make sure that everybody understands that we'd like to be as generous as possible, but with those 2 snow days, we will have to have school on the Friday before Memorial Day. So if you could relay that to the students, I'm sure they'll be happy with me. But also, we'll be trying to look at what the winter weather looks ahead for us, and then also do an SNN out, as well as communicate with our faculty and staff what our options are. So let's keep our fingers crossed that there's nothing more. Thank you.
Thanks. Board of Education report. Anybody have any items to discuss? I know it's been a while since our last board meeting because, again, our February 5th meeting was canceled because of the snowstorm.
Yeah, it's been a while, which is why I'm bringing up something that happened a long time ago. But I just want to make a comment, and I see some of our middle school leadership here, about the middle school musical, which I just thought was tremendous. And one of the things that's most impressive about it is just the sheer volume of kids that are involved at every level. Not just on the day of performance or the practice days, but, you know, the weekends before, where you have kids in there painting sets, you have parents, you have just, it's such a community feeling. And I have to say that the Dashews are really tremendous in what they can pull off in organizing all these kids. Just want to extend a great thanks to them. We're really lucky to have them. When you see the performance, and I think I was most impressed by kind of the opening numbers and the closing numbers, where you have every performer on that stage. It's almost, I mean, it has like a Broadway show feel to it. It's really professional, well done. I just want to say a big thank you to all those involved. Mr. Klugman is here. Thanks for your contributions. And the Dashews, of course, who really lend so much time and effort and energy, and really all the parents who supported, and the school folks as well.
I know a number of us went to a session on the Common Core and special education that was hosted in Guilderland. I thought that was an exceptional program. There's a panel including special ed teachers and parents of special ed students, and I thought the perspectives were very valuable. There were several legislators present who were responding to the panelists, so it was I felt time well spent, and oftentimes voices that I don't hear as clearly, just because I'm not in a situation to hear direct experience from people. The other thing is, I was able to go to the 8th grade social studies teachers had a program where each student, I believe, mostly worked in teams to present a project based on a historical event, whether it's, there were a number on the Holocaust, there were a number on civil rights, there was some on 9/11, every range of historical topic, whether it was domestic or international, was several were presented today in the LMC, and it was just great to get into the middle school. It was almost like the elementary science fairs, but with older students, and the projects all so well displayed. And it was nice to get into the middle school and have that type of experience and see how much hard work went into those. So I really appreciate the middle school administration for making that happen, and the 8th grade social studies teachers for assigning that project.
There's also, we had a second Common Core evening at the middle school, which I thought was very well done, with a panel of teachers and administrators who, you know, explained different facets of the program, and also how actual videotapes of how the instruction is going on in both at the elementary level and the middle school level. And I think that was pretty well attended also. And speaking of advocacy, there, you know, we had that January 30th, which seems like a long time ago, event at South Colony, which again was instrumental in getting a lot of people out and understanding a little bit better what is facing those school districts. I could not attend. I go to the middle school musicals every year because I think every year they're outstanding, as are the high school ones. And but I had to be in Washington, and there was not time to be able to attend. But anyhow, I do have some materials from that conference. I know we have a lot of long presentations tonight, so I won't go into them in detail. But again, in Washington, again, we're looking again at funding from the national level, which for us is a lot in the special ed area, IDEA, and in general funding, and also reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which has been known as No Child Left Behind, and still is in effect because they have not reauthorized it for 9 years. I guess it's become quite a political football, and nobody can come into agreement. Meanwhile, students, to me, you know, suffer. That law originally said that everyone would be 100% proficient in their test scores by 2014, and we're at 2014, and I don't think that's, you know, happened yet. And you know, students and schools have suffered as a result of some of the sanctions on them. But I do have some materials that were the National School Board's version and then the New York State School Board's version of what, we spoke about to our congressman. And want to put it in the library if anybody wants to, look at it sometime, they can.
We'll make it both online for the board as well as in the hard copy library.
And I also want to encourage people, the Bethlehem Central Community Foundation is having March Madness on Friday night here at the high school, and doing it a day early, it's February 28th. Again, they do it to raise, not only will it be a fantastic evening, but also to raise money for the foundation, which has given out a lot of well, work with grants, we have the scholarships, but also, more importantly, are grants for teachers, to come up with different programs in the schools. And we've had some very good programs, and the funding has gone up each year, but programs like this help that. So if anyone who could attend, I think it would be a fun night. I don't know who's playing basketball in the part of the faculty, but there are also some kind of wacky Olympics.
We're there.
And the hooligans. Are you playing basketball?
I do believe is Mr. K here? Yes. Here's your competition right here. It's a good time for everybody, faculty, staff, administration, and the community, so.
Well, Mr. K usually clears the gym floor, cleans it when he's flying all over.
I think that's a challenge.
Actually, can
good.
I say one other
Yep.
thing? It's also sort of the conclusion of the winter sports. I see lots of the BCAA folks out there, and we had a number of successes and great performances with lots of the sports teams, end of the season. Great finale to the hockey season with a tie game, and then they won, and then they moved on to have to play Shen, unfortunately, up at Shen, but I think they proceeded when they didn't think they had a chance. So, you take steps forward every day, and varsity gymnastics, we're sending one of our gymnasts to states. I know, basketball's been also doing great. Swimming. It's been a really terrific winter sports season, so just want to
The
acknowledge
girls
that.
play Thursday night at HBCC.
That's right, right.
Excellent. I would just like to add about the advocacy event that was held at Colony Center, or Colony Central High School. It was very well attended by 40-plus districts in the area, and with all the local legislators. And the key point that was made, again, was the gap elimination adjustment, what they call the GEA, where, the state says districts are due, say, $25 million, but we're going to keep $3 million of it back at the state to fund everything else or to balance our budget. And I would just encourage everybody to advocate and contact the local legislators again and keep it in the forefront that we need to have this taken care of and eliminated, and get rid of the gap elimination adjustment. I think there'll be some slides later on by Judy showing how much it has cost Bethlehem alone is well $15-16 million, I believe, over the past year. So I would encourage the public to advocate to our local legislators and keep it in the forefront.
And I'll just add that our State Advocacy Institute is next Sunday and Monday. If anyone can attend, there's no registration fee, for NISBA members, so.
And we will have appointments. I know Brittany was working on them today for the board that should be in this week's updates.
The second and third, or the following?
It's Sunday and Monday.
This coming Sunday
Well,
morning.
No,
No,
the
the
following
weekend.
Sunday, I'm
This,
sorry.
Okay.
A week from
8th and
this
9th.
Sunday.
8th and 9th, yeah. And Tom, do we still have sample letters that the community could use on our website?
Yes, with our advocacy kit. I know Joe Ellen has sent that out. We've also S&N that out. So on roughly every Thursdays, the break interceded with this past week, but we've been putting out a notice of call to action each Thursday going into the weekend.
Good. Okay. Anyone else? All right, then we'll move on to the main event for the evening. We have a couple different presentations as we will begin our budget preparation process. For the students that are here, it's a pretty long and involved process. We'll start tonight, go as long as we need to, and we'll be meeting almost weekly going forward in terms of preparing the budget and presenting a budget to the community that they'll be voting on in May. And we evaluate each of the programs in the district, from academic programs to transportation to maintenance and operations to staffing, every level. And we have to always make decisions on where we can afford, or what we can afford to fund, and what are the priorities for the district. So we start tonight with Dr. Douglas giving us Facing Challenges, Leading the Way, the State of the Schools Address.
How's this on the mic? Okay? Good. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Board of Education. This evening, we are gathered together to start our annual discussion about the upcoming budget development process. However, before we begin, I'd like to take a look at the state of our schools here in Bethlehem. We have titled our presentation tonight, Meeting Challenges, Leading the Way. We feel that this is a fair representation of what the district has been going through over the past several years. As we begin tonight's presentation, I'd like to recognize the current status of the Bethlehem Central School District. More specifically, I'd like to state that in light of the numerous challenges over the past several years, Bethlehem Central's status can be defined in just one word, and that's strong. Over the course of this presentation, we'll look at many of the challenges the district has had to face and yet maintain a strong educational program for the students of our community. We will do so while keeping in mind the commitment that our district maintains to our core statements of knowledge, character, and value. Our roadmap for this presentation will start off looking at the challenges that the district has faced and/or is continuing to face now and into the future. We will also look at how we, as a community, are working together as a team to provide the necessary leadership for our district to continue with its outstanding educational reputation, ultimately culminating the presentation with how the district is leading the way for excellence in spite of the many challenges that we continue to face. I know I'll be a little repetitious here and throughout some of the evening as we look at the many challenges. However, we need to remain cognizant of what education has been facing in these tough economic times. More specifically, we continue to experience eroding state aid. Over the past several years, the district has received less state aid than what is being provided during the 2008-2009 school year, which is to the left of our chart. Additionally, over the past 4 years, the district has virtually experienced flat school aid with no increases to assist with rising costs. This is largely due to the state balancing its budget shortfalls on the back of all school districts in the state. The enactment of the Gap Elimination Adjustment, or GEA, put a financial stranglehold on all school districts. It is this very same Gap Elimination Adjustment, or GEA, that continues to cause fiscal instability within all of our schools. Some would ask, what is the school district doing about the GEA? We are trying to educate our public and ask them, as well as everyone here tonight, to demand from our legislative leaders that they fully restore the GEA now when they are indicating that they have more than a $2 billion surplus in state funds. If you do not know what the GEA is, as our board president explained a little bit earlier, we've prepared a short video for all to become better informed. Of course, technology poses some problems.
Gap Elimination Adjustment, or GEA as we will refer to it from now on, is one of the major reasons why our public schools are in fiscal peril. What exactly is the GEA? Well, back in 2010, under Governor Patterson, the state attempted to close a $10 billion budget deficit by spreading the funding shortfall around to all school districts in the state. This was accomplished through a reduction in the amount of state aid originally due to all districts. In layman's terms, you have an agreement with a man up the street to do yard work for $50 per month. He's a little short this month though, so for the same work, he offers you $45 instead. The following month, he is still short and pays you only $43, then maybe you get $44 the following month, and so on. In the first 4 years of the GEA, Capital Region districts have lost $387 million in aid that was promised to them by law. That averages out to nearly $3,453 per student over that period of time. Why does this matter to us? Because school districts only have a few options to try and make that money up. One option is to raise property taxes in order to keep programs and services sustained at the current levels. Another option is to start decreasing programs, services, and staff. Oftentimes, art, music, advanced placement courses, and support staff like counselors and psychologists are the first to go. But wait, didn't the state promise an increase in aid this next budget year? Well, that depends on what you define as an increase. Remember the yard work you've been doing and getting shorted on a little bit every month? Well, this month you were paid $45. That's better than the $44 from last month, but it is still not the $50 you were promised. It is actually a decrease disguised as an increase. Despite talk of a projected budget surplus of $2 billion in 2016 and 17, there is no end to the GEA in sight. So what can we do about it? Learn about how the GEA is hurting your district as it relates to programs and services. Learn about the opportunities that are being lost for your children and make the decision to act. Write letters, make phone calls, and meet face-to-face with your legislators and ask them to support bills that do away with the GEA. Log on to educationspeaks.org to learn more about advocating for school finance.
Now that you've learned a little bit more about the Gap Elimination Adjustment, or GEA, what has this meant for Bethlehem Central? Well, up on the slide, you can see over the past 4 to 6 years, Bethlehem Central has lost over $18.7 million. You heard in the portion of the video, it's about $3,500 per student. For us, it's about $3,000 per student that we've lost each year of providing our educational program. But we really haven't lost it. We've had to go and rely on our local tax base to cover what the state is constitutionally required to provide for our students. And that should upset everyone in this room and across this state. In order to address our strained resources, the district has, with the GEA loss over the last 4 years, needed to reduce its workforce by over 164 full-time equivalent staffing positions in order to meet the new financial reality in the state. In general, some individuals would have asked, haven't we been losing enrollment over this same period of time? My answer would be yes, we have been losing enrollment. More specifically, we were going to go into the enrollment projections a month earlier, but we've exited some of those slides out for accommodating for time, but our enrollment report that we regularly put up each year will be posted to the website tomorrow. That enrollment, however, we have had a decrease in enrollment, but it's not been at the same pace as the reduction in educational staffing, and that impacts overall education. Bethlehem Central has been going through an enrollment decline over the past few years. When one looks at the long-range enrollment projections, you will find that we've been losing enrollment over the last 4 years in the range of about 4% reduction over this time period. This, however, appears to be bottoming out at this time as we are seeing kindergarten enrollments starting to level off. What is really important, however, is the fact that our staffing levels have dropped more than 16% of a decrease over this same time period. As you can see, this is more than 4 times greater than the reduction in our student population. This ultimately brings an even greater challenge when it comes to class size. And our class sizes have definite impacts on our educational programming. At the middle school, we are seeing classes with more than 30 students per class. We are seeing fewer staff means difficulty balancing the class sections even when we come to our scheduling at the middle school and the high school. Our teachers need to travel more because we're using them as much as possible within the confines of what is humanly possible within the district. But also, By having them travel so much, it means less personal attention to our struggling students from school to school because they're not always available. The new challenge of late has been the implementation also of a tax cap limit for all public entities. This further restricts the revenue opportunities for all school districts. At the same time, the state is also pulling back funding for public education in order to balance their own mismanagement of the state's budget. Here at Bethlehem Central, we have diligently worked to develop budgets that primarily stay within this framework while maintaining strong educational programs for our students. Over my years as a superintendent, I came in, we had a $7.7 million deficit. We were faced in the first year of the tax cap levy limit to ask our voters, even though we were already cutting over $3.4 million from the budget, that this Board of Education, not this Board of Education, but the Board of Education at the time, as well as the administration, felt that was as much as we could without doing irreparable harm to the educational program. So we made the choice to ask our community, and this community showed overwhelming support. In addition, we've tried to manage our budgets going forward. Last year, we were below the tax cap levy limit, but it's so confusing because everybody thinks it's 2%. It's actually a calculation, and this year, it's actually less than 2%, but as you can see, the projection for a less than 2% tax cap levy limit is around 3.12% for Bethlehem. However, if you look at it in the longevity of the district, these are the lowest budget year percentages that you've seen in some times. One of the more difficult challenges is actually in the area that the Board of Education and the school district administration has no control in determining the final costs. This area is a mandate that was put in place roughly 40 years ago by our legislative leaders. It is our retirement costs which the district is obligated to meet by law. This is not the fault of any of our employees. This is not the fault of the school board. This is not the fault of the school districts. This is a requirement that was put into place decades ago that we are obligated to meet by law. If you notice, our ERS and TRS rates, because it is so closely tied to the avenues of Wall Street and the performance during the recession, has caused tremendous strain on the system and school budgets, with over 187% increase in the past 6 years to our TRS rates and 172% increase over the past 6 years for our ERS rates. That is no one's fault except an obligation that was guaranteed by our state government. And we, as a board and a school, must maintain that constitutional requirement. Overall, the school district has two primary sources of revenue. One comes from our local community in the form of a tax levy. The other source is the state's constitutional obligation to fund our public schools with additional state aid. Unfortunately, the state has been shifting this funding responsibility to the local level. In just the past 5 years alone, the Bethlehem Central School community has been required to fund 10% more of their educational costs that would have otherwise been supplemented by the state of New York. And this graph shows it. In the orange is the state's requirement of the district to fund education. In the blue is the state's requirement, and you can see the downward trend. And if predicting the future, it will always be that the state will move it to the lower level. We can only demand that it stops. Our property taxes cannot always fund this, but as you can see, it is your elected leaders that are saying and putting into place this funding shift. In addition to the state balancing their own budget while causing financial stress to each of the local districts, this reduction is also complicated by the additional reduction of the gap elimination adjustment. So not only have you been funding the 10%, but you're also funding the extra $3.4 million a year to keep education moving forward. And now an even greater challenge is at our doorstep, and a new proposal of a tax freeze for school budgets is already being proposed that will put even greater stress upon our schools. It's kind of like a monetary shell game. The governor is proposing a tax freeze, but our taxes will go up. But he'll write a rebate check just about election time, and then all of a sudden, in a year or two, those taxes have still gone up, but the homeowner is no longer getting a rebate from the state. Who will be the blame? The devil is in the details here, and we want to make sure people are aware of that beforehand. Our main mission is to provide education for the best quality education that Bethlehem can afford and move forward with our community. So with those devils in the details, I would ask people to pay attention because on Wednesday he is going to roll out his new proposal as it was announced today. To continue the stress in our schools, we were promised a reduction and elimination of mandates from the state without adequate funding. This was promised from our governor when he proposed the implementation of the tax cap levy limit. However, this promise has yet to materialize, and the problem worsens with the state piling on new mandates for school districts without additional revenue supports for the implementation of these very mandates. More specifically, there's been a seismic shift for all, especially teachers and administrators, with the Common Core standards, the APPR standards, the increased testing, and so on and so on. All of these, the implementation has been flawed, but yet Bethlehem and its fine professional staff have been trying to address and adapt to the growing situations. In addition, we've seen another shift in our assessment data. This assessment data came out and it shocked everyone. But this assessment data, we should take heart in what our Commissioner of Education has said. He has said that our students are not doing any differently than they were before when we had already seen that there were gains in New York State. And here in Bethlehem, our kids were doing just as well as they were doing before. But we would tell you that it's a new benchmark, and it's going to take time for our professional staff, our teachers, our administrators to adjust to an implementation that has been lagging. But I have every confidence in our administration and our faculty, as well as our students and our parents, as we are proactive in trying to meet the needs to raise these assessments and address the Common Core as a common standard that is our minimum standard that we teach to. In addition, we've put in a one-size-fits-all graduation requirement, and this is something we are going to have to be careful of in the future, as all of our students are important to us, but one college and career-ready outcome or commencement level does not necessarily fit our unique students. Also, for the first time, one of our schools has been designated as a local assistance plan school or a lab school, and that was Glenmont this year. But when you look at it, the formula to identify that means that we have very smart students and we have students that are struggling. And the way that you get identified is because of a gap of a calculation, which has nothing to do with our students. But we are over that gap by 1 percentage point, which means for Bethlehem and for Glenmont, it might be 1 student, right? The whole point of this is we're going to address this. I know the staff at Glenmont and the principal at Glenmont, Mrs. Heffernan, are working diligently on this because they take their successes as a point of pride. And this is something that caught them by surprise, just like the district. The overall piece is that we make sure that we take care of our students, and this will not impede us or stand in our way. And then last, there's been a shift in technology. We've had to start preparing for it last year in regards to preparing for online assessment or moving the Common Core to a new national park assessment. And with this, we have to plan, and that was our technology addition to the budget last year, which we planned over 3 years. Well, with this technology growth, there's also other challenges that we may face, such as maintaining the technology, IT staffing, as well as we are lucky that we have a bond situation that is going to assist us meeting those expectations in the future. Well, you've heard many challenges that we have faced or are facing as we move forward. I'm proud to say that we are striving to meet each and every one of these challenges head-on and continuing to move our educational system forward, albeit in these very difficult economic times. We've only been able to overcome these obstacles through a combined effort of strengthening our collective voice. We are continually in the need to use our voice now and into the foreseeable future to benefit education. We've hosted advocacy nights, as you heard the board talk about earlier, and the slideshow seems to have stopped. these advocacy nights have been very beneficial. Last year, they were really responsible for a large influx of aid at the end of the year in correcting. We have hosted numerous events. We've joined with NYSET, we've joined with NYSBA, we've joined with NISCUS to promote advocacy. We regularly put out teams of board members, parents, and students with the whole hope of affecting the outcome at State Street. If you notice the button, I want to thank our BCTA, and I know they had help from other units, but they were a driving force in working hand in hand together to help spread the word to mend the gap. And by mending the gap, that will save our education, not only here, but across the state for many that need the direct funding. In addition, just so that you know, there's a brief video advocacy event that will tell you specifically about some of our opportunities of how we've shared our voice. All set?
Bless you.
She worked on this so hard beforehand to get it done right, too.
We've already laid off 350 employees, with buildings where I have 100% free and reduced lunch, where students need services, and we can't provide them.
Stakeholders from 47 different school districts converged Thursday night at Colony Central High School to continue an unprecedented call to action on the fiscal crisis facing public schools. A panel made up of school leaders, teachers, and students answered questions and described how a lack of funding is affecting their schools. According to organizers, almost $400 million in promised state aid has been withheld from schools in our region over the past 4 years. They say the loss in funding is due to the gap elimination adjustment. The GEA is the state's policy of withholding school funding to address its own fiscal challenges. One superintendent says a lack of money is affecting classroom space and programs in her district.
We have upwards of 30 students in some of our classes. We have students sitting on radiators. We have cut every single after-school program, kindergarten through 12th grade. So if not for a donation from the Arsenal Partnership, I would have nothing for students to do when they are done with their school day.
Teachers and students at the event indicated that they're seeing an overwhelming amount of cuts to school staff and programs.
We lost 20% of our teaching faculty over the last 4 years. So definitely colleagues are no longer with us. Talented colleagues are no longer with us. Kids, it's harder to get extra help because we don't have transportation every day after school.
A lot of our clubs have been cut. I'm a varsity cheerleader, and we had to fight for it back because we had no funding. So our coach actually volunteered. My brother, unfortunately, is a freshman, and I'm worried about what if the school isn't able to survive so he can graduate where I graduated from.
Organizers say 70% of New York schools are receiving less state aid than they did 5 years ago. Panel members were able to make their concerns known to the many local legislators in attendance.
I would say, imagine I was your child and you had to watch me go through this. So I would just like them to really put into perspective what's happening here.
School leaders say the future for education is bleak if changes aren't made to how districts are funded.
The future is exactly what the governor wants, to break everybody down, have the minimum opportunity for students. And, you know, his answer would be consolidation, but at the end of the day, there are no studies to prove that that's going to save money. So our students won't be competitive and won't be able to produce and compete in the 21st century like other states are able to.
Organizers say that if you're looking to help, the best thing to do is reach out to your local legislators and ask for equal and equitable funding for schools. You can also find more advocacy materials on educationspeaks.org.
In addition to rising to the occasion of being the true lobbyists for students in New York State, everyone here at Bethlehem Central has worked diligently to take a closer look at how we fund our programs so that we may maintain a premier educational system for all. We have worked on cost containment and responsible budgeting while openly communicating our issues and concerns to our public. Over my time here as superintendent, we have worked together to maintain budgetary growth for our educational programs to less than 1% a year over the last 3 years. This, unfortunately, cannot continue if we wish to maintain a program of excellence. We regularly look for ways to find savings that will protect our educational programming. A prime example of this is our recent restructuring of our transportation system within the district. Thanks to the help of our staff, and most importantly, our community, we've been able to implement a new transportation pickup and drop-off point system that has resulted in the district experiencing an almost $1 million savings to our budget. This has assisted the district in keeping many reductions away from programs. We've also worked hard to make sure other department concerns, such as food service, is becoming more self-sufficient so that the budget for education is not impacted by a need to offset these costs so that our students can be fed. One of our most important ways that we have been able to maintain a strong outlook for the future is in our professional relationships with our partners in education. Specifically, we must deal with the business of education, which is, of course, a people-centered business. This business is heavily reliant on professionals who provide daily service to our community and who need to also be appropriately compensated for that service. It is these very professionals who we have worked with within the district over the past year to lower our year-to-year carrying costs for contractual items. This is the one thing we are controlling each year to reduce costs, and we are lucky to be one of the few districts, if not one of the only districts, to have all of its professional contracts settled and in place for the next few years. And I'd like to thank the BPA, the BCTA, the BCUEA, and all of our independent contracts for understanding the crisis in education and really coming together as a collaborative partnership to help our cost structure and performing of our educational mission in the long run for Bethlehem Central. We have also managed our fund balance for the district in order to provide options for future budgets. You know the saying, you can do more with less? Well, I'm here to tell you that we are doing more with less. And it's regularly seen in our classrooms, in our schools, in our district operations, all over the district, and most importantly, on behalf of our students. However, we must be cautious because we are balancing upon a point that we may have to do less with less. And I do not believe that's the mission of this school district or the expectation from this community. This is why we need everyone's help as we address our challenges. In all, the district has tried to comply with everything that our state leaders have asked the school district to do in these difficult financial times. We have reduced staff, even though it's at a 4 times greater amount of reduction than our enrollment. This district has undergone one of the most crucial, devastating decisions of having to close a community school. In addition, the district and its partners have negotiated fair and reasonable contracts that look out for the longevity of the district. We've also looked at our longevity of our infrastructure by passing capital projects that help to upgrade and sustain our community infrastructure. And now, as a result of that, our district is also one of the top 10 districts in upstate New York. We are privileged versus my colleague superintendent just a few short miles away that are pretty much bordering on bankruptcy. In addition, BCHS has one of the highest graduation rates, not only in the capital area, but across the state. It also has been identified as a Reese Ward School. Recently, Ellesmere Elementary was named 2013 National Blue Ribbon School, as well to have joined the ranks of our other schools that have had that distinguished honor. By paying attention to these requests from our leader, the district has compared to other similar districts, as well as districts across the state, provide a great value to the community of Bethlehem Central. And we pointed this out last year in the budget, but we want to really emphasize it. Because if you look at it, the cost per student, general and special education, is about $17,700 per student. The average across the state for schools is $24,410. But similar districts, just like Bethlehem, educate their students at $22,000 plus. That's almost a $5,000 difference and yet we're one of the top school districts in New York State. Remember that GEA number? Imagine what we could do for our community and for our students by maintaining that price, but being able to not need an extra $3,000 per student that's being pulled back to the state. Not only do we try to provide a great value for an excellent education program, we also try to maintain outstanding community support for all of our initiatives and needs. This support can be seen through numerous opportunities over the past couple of years as the community weighs in on what the school district is doing. In the area of budget support, we've primarily received supermajority support on each of our yearly budget votes. Our community has shown great support in maintaining our infrastructure to provide for all of our educational programs as we work through various timelines to deliver on our promise and maintain our schools. Currently, we are awaiting pending approval from the state for our most recent capital project, which will upgrade our schools. This timeline is projected to last over the next few years, with the culmination of the entire project estimated to be around the end of 2015, the summer of 2015. Additionally, the district is also looking at ways to lead in energy efficiency for the district and the area. This will eventually show energy savings that will assist in budget preparations in the years to come. That's an ongoing process that we are hopefully coming to an end before we bring the final project before the board. However, community support does not just show up at referendum times. It shows up regularly throughout our entire school year here at Bethlehem Central. This support and generosity from our community is ongoing, and we appreciate all those who donate to Bethlehem Central for the betterment of the total education program. Here are just a few examples of this ongoing support that the district receives. In addition, we also have many opportunities for our PTA, PTO, and booster organizations that provide regular and ongoing financial support to many of our programs and activities for our students, and especially for our future playgrounds. Each of these items we have discussed so far have identified many challenges that we face, as well as how the district is stepping up to meet these challenges. However, what is even more amazing is that throughout these difficult times, the Bethlehem Central School District has been a beacon for success. We are leading the way in education both in the capital region as well as across the state. According to Business First in 2011, Bethlehem, with its academic prowess, was roughly, believe 13th in the state. In 2012, they moved to 11th in the state. This past year in the rankings, we broke the top 10 for New York State upstate schools and are one of the 10 best schools in upstate New York, all during this very difficult financial time. And the board, the community, the students, and the teachers and administrators should be commended for maintaining their focus as we move through this very difficult time. In addition to this success, like I said earlier, Ellesmere Elementary was named National Blue Ribbon School, but on top of that, it goes to show our neighborhood connectedness to our schools. But it also joins Hammergrell Elementary as a Blue Ribbon School, and also our National Green Ribbon School at the middle school, one of the first schools in the nation to be named so 2 years ago. It's all about teamwork as we lead the way. No matter what, with teamwork, it's about having a strong staff. It's about having strong operations. It's about nurturing individuals. It's about departmental teamwork. And most importantly, it's about the work we do with our students that makes BC strong. It is the leaders among us, our school board members, as well as Mrs. Lynn Lenhart, who is the president of the New York State School Boards Association. Our teachers, who are regularly recognized for their dedication, as well as our recently named New York State American History Teacher of the Year, BCMS's own Miss Megan McCabe. It's about our transportation supervisor, who is with us this evening, as the National School Bus Fleet Administrator of the Year, Mr. Al Karam. It is our teachers who strive to be some of the best in the nation as they receive national board certification, teacher certification, with our two most recent teachers at Glenmont Mr. Peter Rowich and Ms. Jean O'Donnell, receiving National Teacher Certification to join 6 other professionals in the district. It's about preparing for and leading the way in technology. Specifically leading Wired Success, we are looking here in the district to meet some of our obligations with our parents and help our teachers with a management tool for student management systems across the district to provide better service and also hopefully more efficient service to our teachers. It's about our bonding to upgrade our technology infrastructure and plan ahead of what the state is imposing. It's leading the way in those respects and also looking at how we can use one-on-one computing and personal learning to service the best educational needs that we have in our programs. And technology is also about innovation to provide real-world experience to our students. You've heard about our student help desk. Well, it's one of the most beneficial avenues for not only our school district in getting some extra benefits, but for our students, our teachers, and even parents who come in. And it allows the students to really look at real-world experience, and we are a model for other districts. We continue to lead the way by exploring new opportunities, enhance our educational program, especially during these most challenging times. We are exploring, looking at strengthening our program in the coming years with possibly an international baccalaureate program. And this is in the development stage with our teachers leading the way and researching it and providing us the best way that we could improve upon our educational programs in the future. It's about creating a computer science option in conjunction with Siena by applying through the National Science Foundation, which Ms. Gagne, Ms. Monroe are exploring to help bring a new option for our students within a highly technical society that needs computer science programmers and these options for our students. And it's about expanding our science, technology, and engineering and math programs at our middle school in the coming years. We lead by developing skills with our youngest learners to allow opportunities, supported by our parents, that assist students in experiencing a variety of cultures to better prepare them for their future in a global marketplace. We lead by communicating with our constituents and adapting to their needs, whether it is via our website, which we are currently redesigning for the coming year to be more efficient and easier access, or through our many SNNs that we often send out, as well as our social media connections. We do all of this, of course, in the pursuit of one thing: excellence. This way, that excellence, we're able to maintain our status as one of the premier educational institutions in the Capital District, as well as in New York State. If you look at some of our excellence, a majority of our seniors here have A or B averages. We have 7 National Merit semifinalists. We produce 48 AP scholars roughly a year. We're the 2013 Regional Science Bowl champion. We're also the 2013 Mastermind champion. And this is just to name a few. We could go on and on. Both in and out of the classroom, our students lead the way and strengthen the character of BC. We strengthen that character by representing with students such as the Eagle students cheering on classmates, or with our Ellesmere Pride program, or our Hammock Grill students bringing cheer to our troops abroad, or our high school art students working on journals for women in shelters, or our Glenmont students serving their peers. And then we also have our Slingerland students honoring human peace across the globe, and our student character recognition program at the middle school. Each of these show one of our other core statements. Bethlehem Central is about leading the way and fostering that special something that is unique for each of our students. It's about leading the way in our performances and the desire to be well-rounded. It's about leading the way towards our personal best and always rising to the occasion. Most importantly, it's about showing everyone that our uniquenesses make us who we are and that we accept our challenges and we can accomplish anything we set our hearts and minds to. Bethlehem Central will be leading the way in educating the whole child despite the obstacles that may be placed in our way. Our students shine in all aspects of our program. We have a premier educational program, and we will work towards making every program that we maintain a premier program both in and out of the classroom. This way, our students become the leaders that we expect them to be in the future. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, we must continue to lead the way so that our students have the opportunity to shine at the next level of education. We know we will set the course for the future, and we know that we will be successful because we are BC. And most importantly, we all are, from our students to our staff to our community members, we will honor what we know as BC pride. And our students honor it every day as we carry forth our tradition, as well as our teachers, our families, our Board of Education, and most importantly, our community. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Dr. Douglas.
You don't have to be silent. Go ahead. This is something that's new for BC, and next year it will be a little shorter because I won't have to cover 3 years. But I think that gives a very good overall projection of what this Board of Education and this community has gone through up until this point and how we're going to move forward.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Douglas on the presentation?
I just have a request that if you, it was a very early slide, but you were talking about the ERS and TRS systems. For students in the audience, could you just briefly mention, clarify what that means?
Correct. What happens is we usually use the abbreviations TRS for Teacher Retirement System and ERS for Employee Retirement System to represent those systems. The reason there's two of them is because there's two categories. If you're in the instructional side, you would be part of TRS. If you're on the support side, you would be part of ERS, and that's how they distinguish between the two. But it is something that's not in control of the teachers, the support staff, the board, or the administration. It's an education obligation under New York State law.
Anyone else? I guess if it,
Hi, Patty, I just have a question. When does the state decide whether or not they're going to have the gap elimination adjustment, and when would that decision be made? Is it before we even vote on a budget? Is it after we vote on a budget? Has it already been decided for this year? We're hoping for the next year?
Ms. Michelson, I think that's a wonderful question. If you'd like to wear a button, I have them in my pocket. The gap elimination adjustment is a part of the budget process, and it is part of the governor's budget process. The way you impact it is you have to get all the legislators to tell the governor, we're going to override you, do this, and they need to have the power to override. It is all part of the budgetary process, so now is the most important time to make your voice heard. Be a pest.
Yeah.
Demand. Even if they would put it back in over 2 years or 3 years, and do it so that every district gets a third, a third, a third, or a half, a half, a half. For us, in 1 year, that half would be roughly $1.8 million. That could make a huge difference in our financial longevity down the road. So I would say we won't know until they pass the budget what they do. But last year, they ended up putting $900 million back in. This year, we're asking for $1.3 to $1.9 billion because the governor has said we have a surplus. If there's this supposed $2 billion surplus and the gap elimination is $1.3 billion, then how do we have a surplus if we haven't filled our hole? That's what we need to be stating. Letters to the editor, letters to the Times Union, letters to talk shows for the radio. That's the biggest thing, is to call this issue out, that we need to work for the betterment of New York State. Because remember, public service and public education is a major economic engine for the state as well. And you have to take care of all the pieces to an engine. Hope that
yeah, and I just would add to that, Patty, that the governor has a proposal out there already. We know what our estimated gap elimination, I believe, is against the budget. And Judy will show that. But the process works that the governor presented his budget back in January. It's now before the legislature, and there's a give and take back and forth, a negotiation process that happens between now and most likely prior to April 1. The past several years since Governor Cuomo's been governor, they have had an April 1 budget in place. The expectation, I understand, is that they will have an April 1 budget. So between now and April 1, there will be a set budget that's negotiated between the legislature and the governor. Where we end up with the gap elimination will really depend on the pressure that the legislature gets from their constituents in trying to restore the money.
So he is proposing
He has already a proposal. We know what our,
there will be a gap elimination adjustment?
oh, yes, yes. The GEA is still there. His budget proposal did include a gap elimination adjustment.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is the total value of the buyback 1.3 billion, or is that just a partial elimination of the GEA?
Roughly the total amount in the budget, I believe, of the GEA is about 1.3, 1.4 billion. That doesn't mean, I mean, I think you pose a good point. We'd love to have the 1.3 billion back for all schools, because I think that would do great good for all students. But we also have to remember, that's money that we should already have in the budgets that the communities are being asked to supplant. Getting that money, and then there should be a normal increase. But if we could just get one, pass on the increase, and then go to the next year and be made whole, that will be very beneficial, even if it's done over 2 years. But right now, our estimated recovery at the rate the governor is going, it will take 33 years before we will be made whole. So that's the problem. Other questions? I have just 4 leadership awards here that nobody knows about. So what better time before we start budget? So I would like to ask Dr. Charmaine Woodgesinger if you'd come forward. Mr. Downey, would you come forward as well? This is on behalf of the New York State School Boards Association for Board Excellence Award for 150 points accumulated in service time and academic credit. So Mr. Downey, on behalf.
Thank you.
And congratulations. That's for you. And we're going to need a picture of everybody. And then each level, oh, stay up here. You all might as well stay up here. Each level requires a certain amount of ongoing service. And our next one, they usually have pins, but I think the pins kept getting lost. So they've started doing the certificates, and I think I'll get you my Be the Change for Kids pin. But also at this next level, we have a recognition for Mrs. Diane Ciccone Stevers for over 250 points and credit hours to school board leadership. Congratulations. And then our next one, oop, you weren't supposed to see that. Goes to Mr. Michael Cooper.
For 250 points.
And of course, Mike, you might want to stay up here for this one. Our last one goes to our board president, Mr. Matthew Downey, for 250 points of extra educational time. Many board meetings I have to say, Matt has had some of the shortest board meeting in the past 6 months, and I'm trying not to do away with that. So there you go. Congratulations. And if we could afterwards get a picture with the board and everything with Joellen. So I want to thank everybody for their support as well over this time as we continue to keep the emphasis of Bethlehem Central strong. So thank you.
All right, next we have, the next presentation is the initial 2014-15 budget proposal. Judith Keough.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Judy Kehoe, and tonight I'm going to present the district-specific information for you on our baseline budget. As you know, this night is our
Can you
kickoff.
speak up?
You can't hear?
No, not well.
A little higher. Nick is on it. There we go.
Yeah, okay,
Projecting
much
now. This is our initial kickoff where we give you the baseline numbers, and this is really our starting point in the coming weeks, because as we get further into the process, we'll be able to refine a number of our estimates, both on the revenue side and on the expenditure side as well. So I'm going to cover a bunch of different areas tonight, basically the state aid numbers for us, and the tax cap calculation that I know everybody is curious to see, and then rolling out all of the totals. And then tonight, we also will have a department-specific presentation with Mr. Karam and myself covering the highlights for transportation. Each year, our starting point is really to look at the governor's aid run, because that's our first indication of what we might expect from the state aid formulas. The formulas are based on usually reimbursement-based or very involved formulas at the state level where they determine how much the districts are able to receive. In our 13-14 budget, we had estimated that we would be receiving about $22.6 million. As the year goes by, as we submit actual numbers, we get updates mid-year from the state, and in fact, we are going to be coming in slightly below this year's estimate. I mention that only because every year the question comes up, well, how come you just don't use the numbers that are on the governor's aid run? And what we need to do is take a look at those estimates and adjust them based on what we know to be specifically the case for Bethlehem. So for instance, on the governor's aid run, he had included $6.144 million for building aid for the district. Well, we know that this year is the first year that we had approval from the community to do a capital outlay project. And based on that, we know that we're going to be getting additional building aid next year of $68,000. So in this particular case, we've increased the building aid estimate by $68,000 because we know something that the governor's not aware of, and we need to take that into account as we are looking at those estimates. So those are the types of adjustments that we do. Based on that review, we are predicting that we'll have state aid of about $22.5 million. And as we roll out the total for the revenues, that is the number that you'll see in there. Now, budget to budget, that's actually a $135,000 decrease for the district, so not an insignificant number to us. Of course, our big question is what will happen with the gap elimination adjustment. As Patty had inquired, we're at $3.462 million in the governor's initial proposal. So the big question will be how much will come to us when the budget is actually adopted. So I guess we have hope that within the next few weeks we should get this information. And while 100% would be delightful, I don't know that we will actually see that. Perhaps it'll be a third, maybe a half, but we will have to update these totals once we see what that looks like. And for some reason, that's not, there we go. Okay. Now the tax cap calculation, I'm not going to go through this line by line, you can thank me now, but this basically is to give you an indication as to the complexities of the formula that the state has out there for us to determine how much we are able to levy in taxes each year. Ultimately, of course, the decision on how much is raised is subject to the board, what they adopt within the budget, and then ultimately subject to what the community is willing to support when they come out at the May budget vote. There are a number of different factors that are included in there. There are items that are added in and subtracted out. And one of the factors is this allowable levy growth factor, which is 4 up from the bottom, and that is supposed to gauge the degree of inflation that is present in the economy, and therefore the amount that you can increase your levy by. It is capped out at no more than 2%. However, if inflation is below that, you have to use the lower number. Those numbers are provided to all local governments from the Office of the State Comptroller, and that factor for the 14-15 budget year is 1.46%.
Judy, just so that you know, there's a laser pointer on there if you want to point and show where that number and factor comes in, because I think that's the misnomer, the 2% tax cap.
Yeah,
It's not
right there.
actually 2%, it's whatever this calculation determines.
Correct. So, and I find even today, the media is still putting out there that it is 2%, and it's not. It's really designed to take into account variations that are unique to every single community. So if there is a significant growth in your tax base. Line 2 is your tax base growth factor. That's supposed to measure a community's brick and mortar growth over the course of a particular year. So the assumption being, if your community is growing, you must have additional demands that are placed upon your district, so that gives you the ability to raise additional taxes in order to support that. Okay. The capital exemptions is one of the items that you can take into account that's unique to your district. And you'll note that there is a significant change in that number in this current year. The capital exemptions is supposed to represent your investment in your infrastructure. It's generally pegged to the amount of money that a district spends on debt service for projects that have been approved by the voters. And then from that number, you subtract the amount of aid that you receive in those state aid formulas. One of the changes in our state aid this year is that we've had a significant reduction in the amount of building aid that is coming to the district. And that is largely the reason why, because we're getting less in our building aid number from the state, that in fact pushes up the capital exemption amount. There was a change in the building aid reimbursement amount, and what that means is we get less aid because they've lowered the percentage that they will cover on those costs. So because of that, the capital exemption number is in fact pushed higher for the 14-15 year. There are no exemptions this year for the ERS or the TRS pension contributions. In order to get any exemption amount, the increase in the pension rate has to increase by more than 2%. So I have another slide where I'll give you the trending on those rates, but we are below that this year, so there are no exemptions. So based on all of those various calculations, the district could levy up to an increase of 3.12% in the tax levy to just shy of $63.3 million. And that's the amount that would only require a 50% approval threshold in the May vote. Okay. Because we have just approved the support staff contract and we have just processed those adjustments from that, we are still working to update our projections for this current year, and we will have those numbers for you at the March 5th meeting. Normally you have it as part of this meeting, but just with the timing, we needed a little bit more time to put that together. So that's coming. Something to make you really want to come back for the March 5th meeting, right? On our summary of revenues going into the baseline, the school tax amount that's included in our baseline assumes a 0% increase, because of course that's going to be one of the discussion points that we have. How much do we need to raise in order to support whatever the level of programming is that we ultimately decide on? Okay. Our pilot payments, those are the payments in lieu of taxes, and those are payments that come to the district and to all of the other communities based on agreements that are in place from projects that are funded through the town's industrial development agency. And based on the current schedules, we are getting just under $3.1 million in the 14-15 school year. The bulk of that is from the PSEG energy plant, and that is at just under $2.8 million, and the remainder of the amounts are from a medical arts building and then also from the numerous projects within the Vista Development Park. So that's what's included in the $3.1 million. State aid is at the 22.5 that I had highlighted before. The other revenue is a combination of different things. It's Medicaid reimbursements, charges reimbursed to us from other school districts, facility rental charges, and things of that nature. So that's relatively stable with the prior year. The fund balance amount is also going to be part of our discussions going forward, where we're using $1.75 million of our fund balance in the current year. That will be our discussion point of how much, if any, do we wish to use to help provide a funding source going forward. So with those assumptions in place, we're at $88.593 million in revenues going into this. Okay. So you can see there's quite a swing on these potential adjustments to revenue. We could, if we went to the maximum allowable tax levy, generate $1.9 million that would help close that revenue shortfall. If we were to get 100% of the gap elimination adjustment, that would provide almost $3.5 million. I don't think that's very likely, so as we get to the end of our review of these various areas, we're going to have to evaluate how much do we want to draw on from each of those different pieces. And while the fund balance isn't technically a revenue, it's really more a funding source, that too will come into the play. And we know at the end of the day that we need to balance our total revenues with our total expenditures. So we could get up to close to 94 million, depending on the mix. On our expenditures, based on our initial totals, we are showing about a 3.34% increase in total expenditures, just over $3 million. What's included in here is really intended to be an apples-to-apples comparison for everybody of what is included within the budget. So for instance, your salaries numbers are assuming that we have the exact same staffing levels going into 14-15 as we have in 13-14, and that number represents what is included within the various collective bargaining agreements that have just been approved. What you will see in all of our slides for all of the different areas is on the salary increase, there appears to be a slightly higher percentage increase, and part of that is because in our 13-14 budgeting on the salary numbers, because we did not have a contract in place for our support staff, we didn't provide for that cost of living increase within that salary number. So 13-14 in the budget is a little bit lower than it actually will be projecting out to be based on the settlement of that contract, which is what makes it appear to be a slightly higher increase on the salaries. The total is 3.9, so the actual is going to be below that. So in any of the departments where the non-instructional salaries are a significant piece of that department's budget, you're going to see where we show projected actuals for the current year, just so you can get a sense of what the true increase is from this fiscal year into the next fiscal year. The other elements within the budget have not changed significantly. Again, we've tried to hold the line on the various programmatic expenses, but in the next few slides, I will give you some additional details on some of those larger elements. I'd like to start with the fringe benefit overview. 13-14 was a tremendous year in terms of the increases that we were looking at, and I'm delighted to say that our increase for 14-15 is in the low single digits, and that is welcome news for the district. The increases that we were looking at in 13-14 were driven primarily by those increases in our pension costs for TRS and ERS. Much more nominal increases this year. In health insurance, we are averaging rate increases of about 5.28%, which is a wonderfully low rate given what we've seen in years past. About 3.75% of that increase is not based on the district's utilization of the health benefits, but in fact is from taxes and fees that are included within the components of the Affordable Care Act. So part of our increase is doing our part to help fund this overall system that is rolling out across the country. Our TRS costs are up about $607,000, and again, that's based on the rate increase that we're experiencing for that. ERS, the rate actually is going down this year, so the increase is slight, and it is based mainly on the increases in salaries that are pegged to that percentage amount. Okay. So overall, under 4% is nice trending. As we get refined estimates, we will be able to hopefully lower these because these are, conservative numbers, and we hope to lower that in the coming weeks. Right now, the TRS rate is estimated to be a range of between 17.25 up to 17.75%. We have included the maximum amount within these initial calculations so that we don't have to find the money later on. Hopefully, we can just reduce it. They're projecting that it might be coming in around 17.53%, so we'll watch that to be finalized within the next few weeks. Our debt service. We strive to keep these numbers as level as possible because by managing the debt service that we have out there, it helps us control any impacts in our budgets. It also, as we're planning what projects that we're going to do, everything has a finite life, and if we can try to maintain these assets and keep them in reasonably good condition, that also helps us even out our costs as we go forward. The bus lease that we had in place, you can see, is now down to 0 in the 14-15 budget. In our 13-14 budget year, we in fact are making the final payment on that. Our bus bans reflect the 5-year amortization period that we have on prior bus purchases that had already been approved. So again, by keeping that relatively stable, that helps us control those costs. I also wanted to highlight, we had a previously approved energy performance project, EPC for short. That is about $552,000 per year in debt service, and the 14-15 budget year is the final year of that payment. So that would be a significant reduction. If you recall, we had talked about this when we were reviewing the capital projects because we noted that by the time the debt starts to kick in associated with the $20 million bond work that we're just undertaking now, we will again be able to maintain level debt service because these payments will be dropping down. You'll note a new line item because the construction will be starting. This year, we'll be taking out short-term temporary financing. That BAN is a bond anticipation note, and that $221,000 represents the interest that would be due from taking out that financing. So total debt service around the $11.5 million number, and that I do not expect to change as we go through the coming weeks. With the baseline revenues of $88.593 million, and our expenditures at $93.4 million, that's giving us a preliminary gap of about $4.8 million. If we're able to take advantage of being the beneficiary of some of that restored GEA money, if we perhaps go up to that $1.9 million, that could be coming to us from the maximum allowable tax levy. Possibly using some fund balance, we may be able to largely close this gap by drawing on revenue sources as opposed to having to make the significant reductions that we've had to make in prior years. So I'll really be doing backflips when I can stand up here and say that we've achieved a balanced budget coming into this in the baseline, but to say that we have these options and the need to make fewer reductions, I think is a very positive way to start off our budget process. So that's the conclusion of the general overview of what is included in the baseline budget. We do have detailed schedules on the revenues and the expenditures, and those will be posted up on the district's webpage. So if you're curious to take a look at those, that will be available to you. At this point, we're going to start on the unless.
Can I suggest any questions on your first?
Okay. Questions on the first part? Or are you begging for mercy? Make her stop talking about numbers.
The TRS and the ERS, you're pretty comfortable with, I mean, you said you estimated them a little high, but that it won't be higher.
No, I'm very comfortable that those numbers will not be higher. Again, it's all a percentage of payroll. The payroll numbers we're pretty close on, so it's really knowing what the final TRS rate will be. That is the only rate that would change for us going forward.
I think one of the emphasis that we're trying this year especially is whatever is our highest projection, we're using that as our initial number because it can only get better than that. And Judy, as well as the state, has been very good at least giving us a range. We're just never going to go on the short side of that range.
Can I just ask for the benefit of the audience, that you explain what the fund balance is and any restriction on what the board, the district can carry and not carry over in subsequent
Sure.
years?
Your fund balance really represents an accumulation of money saved from prior surpluses that you've had in your budget. And there are both restricted and unrestricted components in that fund balance. The restrictions are controlled by usually local finance law or general municipal law. There are very specific purposes to which you can have your restricted fund balance. So for instance, if you're self-insured on workers' comp as you are, you can have a workers' comp reserve. You can have tax certiorari reserves for challenges to property tax assessments. You can have an employee's retirement system reserve. So everything is very much regulated by statute. Whatever is left over as not being restricted is your unrestricted fund balance, and that is limited to no more than 4% of the subsequent year's appropriations. So that's intended to make sure that you're not stockpiling cash when in fact you could be using that to control the level of tax increases that you're levying on the community. And I will have more details on the fund balance when we get into the projections, and I couldn't let you get out of a budget season without giving you my slide with that information. So that'll be coming also.
Usually at this point in the state budget discussions, we have a general idea of kind of the give backs. Do we have any sense of what the legislature is likely to do in their one House bills as far as what?
They haven't even come to a resolution on joint House budget agreement on
Right.
money, so
But there's
until
no-
that comes, we won't have any idea.
Right, but that's like 10 days away. I mean, they're going
We
to be
would hope.
doing that. That's like March 10th, 11th. They're going to pass their one House bill. So there's no numbers floating around, like partial restoration or whatever. Okay.
Nope, unfortunately.
I think there's a lot of support
Yeah.
in the legislature.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
I think they're trying to figure out how much they can and how much they can pull back from the governor.
Plus, I'm not sure if they fully understand what the tax freeze implication is yet,
Yeah.
and what that cost will be.
That will be big because the governor said that they will be rolling that out either late tonight or tomorrow.
Right, okay.
Unfortunately, that surplus that they're talking about really is a shell game, and that their assumptions out 5 years that the state's growth in their budget will be 2%. And so that means not spending any more money in order to get to that surplus. So I'm not sure how, I'm not sure, but I know there is support in the legislature to give back some of that GEA.
And it's interesting that you say the shell game with the slide. I appreciate that. But also, if you notice with the tax cap levy limit, our number that we have to use is 1.46. But if you've noticed over the past 3 or 4 years, the governor has said, I've kept spending increases less than 2% at the state level. Well, less than 2% at the state level is $3.6 to $4.5 billion a year. Well, this year he kept it at 1.89%, but yet our calculation's at 1.46. So the governor, in essence, has gone above what he says he's going to hold himself and everybody else to. And nobody's really caught that yet, but their budget's increasing a lot more than our budgets are able to, mainly because they're shifting their costs down to our level. So when you talk to legislators, remind them of that. How come you can't be at 1.46%, but we have to be careful because we want that extra 0.5 to come to us. So.
At the end of the day, we'll be grateful to take what they give us, and we have to make it work because that's what we're charged with doing so that we can fund the maximum amount of programs. You see, I've been joined up here by Mr. Al Karam, who is our Director of Transportation. I'm going to kick it off just to talk about the numbers, and then when we get into some of the programmatic areas, I'll turn it over to Mr. Karam for you. The total budget for transportation, it will be just under $5.9 million. If you look at the non-salary items for the department, it's actually down budget to budget $58,000. And that is, I know Al and his staff work very hard to try to control all of their costs so that we can free up the most possible resources for the instructional program. One of the items that you'll see slightly further on is on the insurance. This is our vehicle insurance and our liability insurance. The district had done an RFP, a request for professional services, which we do just to make sure that all of our providers of our various contractual items are sharpening their pencils, and we do have some significant savings that came from that process. The piece of it that relates to transportation is about $25,000, so that is an item that we can, right off the bat, pull from that insurance number, and that will add to the decreases that we will have for the department. I wanted to give you a little bit more detail on the salary numbers, just because, again, that $4.7 million is a significant number. As we noted, it's all about the people who are driving the buses and the attendants who are working with the students with special needs. The projection on the number of employees is flat, so whatever we have in place now is what we've assumed in this carry-forward budget. I want to highlight, on most of our slides for our departments, we tend to show full-time equivalents. We don't do that for transportation just because while the vast majority of all of our employees are less than full-time, many of our drivers are between 4 and 6 hours a day with their schedules. We only have 4 drivers who are truly full-time at 8 hours a day. And the same goes for our attendants. You know, they're working a few hours in the morning, they're working a few hours in the afternoon. So because we want you to get a sense of how many people are working in the department, we list it as numbers of employees and not FTEs. If you look at the revised budget number, those are the numbers that I referred to earlier, which show based on the approval of the BCUEA contract, and the existing staff numbers are in place, we project that we're going to come in at about $4.5 million for this year, and then that going into the 4.7, that's just about a 4% increase in the salaries going forward. So a part of that is really the steps and the COLA, that's part of the contract, and part of that would be any increases in hours, not an increase in numbers of positions, but sometimes we increase the hours for the employees in order to cover those routes. I added a slight provision in these numbers reflected on the line for substitutes and field reconstruction related. As we had talked about at our prior meeting, because the field work is going to commence, we're not going to be able to necessarily hold all of our athletic events on the district fields. And because of that, there will be some trips that are taken out to other facilities, and that will come with a slightly increased cost in transportation as well from needing to transport our teams out there. So that number is included within that substitutes and field-related reconstruction items. The agenda tonight does include a lowering of the sub-rate for our drivers. So that number will actually, we'll see some downward cost reductions on those items because the contract rates were lowered for new hires. That's allowing us to lower the sub-costs as well. Okay. A large portion of the transportation budget is in fact funded by state aid. Again, it's a reimbursement-driven aid formula. And our aid ratio is just under 64% of our eligible expenditures. We projected $4,450,000 at this time last year. Relative to transportation aid, it was a little bit of an unknown for us because we weren't sure what the final savings were going to be based on the changing in the routing. The actual state aid number that we're looking at for 13-14 is just under $4.3 million. So it's going to be a little bit lower than what we had estimated last year. But at the end of the day, if you look at that state aid plus the revenue that comes from the sale of buses, we have about 74% of the total costs for the department that are offset with these other forms of revenue. I had mentioned earlier the $25,000 that we can pull from those numbers. Again, we didn't want to pull it without highlighting that for you so that you could see what that change will be. But that is something that we will take out of those baseline totals because it reflects the lower costs that we attained on that RFP. I have to mention the snow word because it's been quite a season. I have to offer up a thank you to Al and his staff because it's been quite an effort this year to try to keep up with Mother Nature. Part of this will lead to the one request that Al has for his budget. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to him to talk a little bit about what snow means to transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to show you a couple of just short videos that should give you a flavor of what we do at the bus garage on those snow days when everybody's hunkered home and we're there cleaning and prepping the buses for the next school day. So let me see if I can make this work for you right quick. Now, where you at, Joellen? Oh, you gotta do that. We have to wake up the mouths a little bit here. There we go. So the first video you're going to see is the snow rake station. We have 8 drivers, 2 on each side of the bus, 2 buses at a time, cleaning all the snow off the top of those buses. DOT regulations don't allow large vehicles to run with snow accumulation on top. Some of you probably been behind those tractor trailers and vans and whatnot, and it's like you're in a blizzard sometimes, or you get these big chunks coming at you. So we do our level best to clean the snow off of there. So that was just the other day. Typically, we have about we have 123 buses currently in the fleet. You take those that are inside the shop for one reason or another. So probably around 113 buses that we have to clean each and every time. The second video, see if I can get it going here. So this is the Valentine's Day snowstorm. When we first get to the bus garage, this is what we see.
Snow storm that we just had from yesterday afternoon till this morning. All these buses got to be dug out later on today. Get ready for school on Monday.
So that's a lot of snow, obviously. It all has to be cleaned by hand currently. The small buses, we brought down a snow blower to get that snow from in front of them so we can drive them out and clean them and do what we need to do. Just to give you some numbers, in 2010, 2011, this is just driver labor hours for the year on snow removal. We spent $6,800. 11-12 was sort of a tropical year for us. We only spent $300. The snow just wasn't hitting us like it should. 12-13, $4,300, and so far, 13-14, $5,600. That doesn't include the labor time for the mechanics and the office staff. We also go out and we help clean and move buses and what have you. If you were to include the mechanics, their average labor is about $5,000 per snow season. So there is significant cost behind prepping those buses, getting them ready to, when Dr. Douglas says the school is open, then we got to roll. And so what we're going to ask for, and hopefully you will approve, a snow cleaning machine that's going to cost us about $26,000. That's delivered, assembled, and some training on that. You going to go over this? I think it's the next slide. Yep, there it is. Okay. So this is the picture of the snow removal machine. It's one-person operation. It has a V-plow on top, bristles, a squeegee type of item that's also hanging down. The buses simply drive under it. The operator raises or lowers that V-plow. to the point where it will push or clean 2 feet of snow off the top of those buses. And if you haven't cleaned, you know, like your garage or your roof at the house, whatever, it is labor extensive. It is muscle aching type of work. Your muscles will be aching for about 3 days thereafter. And unfortunately, most of our staff is not, you know, young 18, 19-year-olds. So it does take its toll on us. That machine would be extremely helpful. Years ago, I know Dr. Lyman, who was a board member, would invariably ask, when are you going to build something like that, Al? And unfortunately, we don't have the capability to do that. And they weren't making them back then, but they are now. So.
One of the items that we wanted to talk about, since we were on transportation tonight as well, was we've had some concerns raised in the past when we have our groups, both our buildings, taking field trips, and then any of our non-league athletic trips. We've typically had our booster organizations funding those trips. And it's been out of necessity because with all of the reductions that we've had to make in the budgets, we just couldn't afford to do that. But we know that that takes a toll on the volunteers who are trying to raise the money to support these programs. So what we're working on is a way to revise those rates that we'll come back to everybody with in a few weeks out, but just so that we can lower those rates that we're charging for some of those trips. We're going to have to take into account obviously, we don't want to dramatically increase the number of trips that we're doing on the laws of economic supply and demand. If you lower the prices to a certain point, you could have an uptick in those trips, and that could be harmful to the costs for running the transportation department, but would really like to get to more of a reasonable, kind of a market-based perception of what's more reasonable for those charges. So that would benefit not only our schools with field trips, the non-league trips for the athletics, but it also would benefit other community programs, including like the summer Parks and Rec program for the parks, because they use our services for that as well. And every year we talk about the bus replacement proposition. As you know, this is something that we are required to get voter approval on because it is a capital expenditure. So I'm going to turn the mic back over to Al so he can talk a little bit about his needs for this.
All right, thank you, Judy. The graph you're looking at is a historical graph of our bus replacement. Starts 2001, 2002, all the way up to next year. And the blue bars are the buses that we've purchased, the number of buses, and the red, the number of buses that were needed for that particular year. Notice in 06, 07, the bus proposition was defeated. We tried to make up for that in 08, 09, and 9 and 10. That's why you see a spike in buses purchased. And then we flatlined, of course, due to the economic issues and the severe budget problems facing the school district. In 11, 12 on, we've purchased 6 buses each year, and you can see where the needs are for the department. Now, I'd like to say just a couple of words on that. About 4 years ago, we did take the lead, and we went from a 10-year replacement plan. So from 01, 02 until 10, 11, we were at a 10-year replacement plan. We switched that to a 12-year replacement plan, but we really haven't been keeping up with it. The reasons for us to keep the district fleet replacement plan on track and our buses in good condition is really to help us avoid additional costs down the road. And I'm going to share with you here in just a couple of few seconds what those additional costs are. And I would like to, for you to note that if we maintain the current rate of replacement, we will in 7 years have buses pushing 17+ years of age. And that's something I don't think you really would want. So to maintain appropriate balance on the overall operational impact and costs, ideally, based on a 12-year plan, we would be replacing 10 buses or 8% of the fleet. so that in 12 years we would turn over the entire fleet. However, fully understanding the budgetary pressures, we're only asking for 8 buses or 7% to keep us close to where we need to be and avoid aging the fleet. When you age the fleet, what you'll end up looking at is an increase in maintenance cost, increase in off-site bus repairs, increase in bus costs, more road failures, higher out-of-service rates, increased spare fleet, or the size of the spare fleet, a negative return on investment on the older buses. The more money you put in them, and the more breakdown they're going to occur when you try to sell them or auction them off, you're not going to get what you're putting into them. Possible removal from active service by the Department of Transportation. And this is really the one that concerns me the most, is the possible catastrophic failure in a major accident due to weakened structural integrity of the metals that we don't see. All we see is the outside of the bus, nice and shiny. But there's a lot of stuff going on in between the inner skins of that bus and the outer skins and the undercarriage of that bus. So again, we're asking for 8 buses. We should be really getting 10 to get our replacement plan back on track. Do you want to speak to the timing of the approval and vote?
The board does not have to make a decision on this evening, but it will need to make a decision by the meeting next week on March 5th, because that's the date that the legal ad has to be adopted, and that's the one when we tell everybody the date and the number of, the total budget to be approved, and or for the bus purchases, the amount that we need. So it's specifying what's going to be appearing on the ballot, that the budget vote will be held, and then the specific number and cost on these buses. So tonight's the night Al is here, so if you have questions related to that, that's what he's here for. If you're prepared to make a decision tonight, if you're comfortable with that, we can do that, and then we'll just include that within the legal notice next week.
I had a question for Al. On that, in recent years, now with the increased efficiency that we experienced, did that reduce the need for buses, for some of the buses?
When we increased the efficiency, we did reduce the size of the fleet. If you remember, we were able to sell off 14 buses, but those were the older buses. You still have a need to replace what's currently in the fleet. We went down from 140 some odd buses down to 123. Even though we increased efficiency, we still have to get rid of these older buses. We have buses right now that are pushing 14 years old, 13 plus.
And have an average of how many miles?
They're probably up in the 80s or 90s, 90,000. The issue with school buses in the Northeast is not really mileage. And I've said this before, a diesel engine, you should be able to get 500,000 miles on it before you have to rebuild it. The problem in the Northeast is rust. There's a lot of areas in between, as I said before, the inside, what we call the inner skins and the outer skins, where you don't see the structure, the backbone of that bus. You don't see it, but that's where the rust really takes place. And by the time we catch it, when it works its way from the inside out, it's sort of too late in that it begins to cost you a lot of money to fix and repair. And you begin chasing that rust all over the place. And typically, those are the older buses that begin to manifest that sort of rust issue. So 10 years is probably a better replacement plan, but again, given the fiscal realities, we can push it 10 years. We're running 13-year-old buses now. Those 13-year-old buses, if you approve our request for those 8, by the time the new buses arrive, they would be 14 years old. So we're already pushing the age out there. Currently, the average age of a bus is 6 years old. The youngest we've ever had the fleet on average was somewhere around 2002, 2003 at 4.2 year-old buses. The worst we've ever had it was 6.9 back in 1996, but we were running 25% out of service rate back then as well. older buses, more problems, a lot of issues.
Al, you talk about the rust. I know that the district put in a new bus wash. Have you seen that improve, though, in terms of buses getting as rusty? And
That's a good question, Matt. And the bus wash came online in 2007. All the buses prior to that, and those are the buses that we are still trying to replace, they're way gone. That bus wash is not going to have any effect on them. So on the newer buses since '07, they're holding up pretty good. And, you know, in due time, we'll be able to tell if, you know, in wintertime, we should be able to wash a bus, or we should be washing buses once a week, but in this extreme cold, anytime it drops below freezing, we can't do that. It just plays havoc with electronics and windows and emergency exits and whatnot.
Okay.
Enough of the polar vortex. Yeah.
Anyone else? Joanne?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. One is, if you get the 8 buses, what's going to be the oldest bus? You still going to have a 13-year-old bus out
No, the 13-year-olds will be gone.
there? Okay, so,
The next, they'll be, the oldest bus will probably be about 10 years old.
okay. And the other question I have is maybe for Judy. It's on the overtime costs when you're going through the budget. What drives all the overtime? Is it, you know, athletic events or events where you have bus drivers kind of sitting there waiting for students, you know, athletes, or what's the driver?
It's the extra trips that drive that. So if it's the athletic trips, that, you know, anything that's outside of the regular day is what tends to drive that overtime. It could be sometimes routing, you know, if there's a breakdown or a problem with the bus, that would cause extra time to be incurred. Because so many of our drivers are below 8 hours, any of those types of extra hours are going to be at straight time, not really at overtime rates. But, yeah, it's mostly extra trips that cause the overtime.
Actually, I have a question on that overtime slide, which is slide number 22, but before I go to that, on the fleet itself, I know that some of the newer buses have, it's like a safety feature. I mean, the seats are taller, they have seatbelt, you know, something. Do you know, is that correct? There's some of the buses, the newer buses, I remember my kids went to kindergarten, the backs were way up. And do you know what percentage of the fleet have those newer safety features, and what percentage of the fleet is just so old that it doesn't have that?
On the seat backs, all of our buses now have the taller seat backs, which New York State was the first to go to, and that has since been adopted across the nation. So all our buses have that.
Okay, okay. Then can we go back to slide 22 for a second, please? No, well, actually, I have a question on this one, but then it's the one after that. So on this one here, it says, let's see. Hang on for a second. Actually, it had numbers on it. I remember seeing that for a second. Hang on for a second. The one that said extra trips. Substitute and field trip, that one there. It says the initial budget is, that increases because of the possibility of moving athletes to another field, correct? The 305.
A part of that. I've put an allowance in there. I don't know what the exact number is going to be.
But then the underneath is the extra hours overtime actually goes down. That number for.
Yeah, the 424,000?
So-
Yeah, it went down slightly.
That we would need extra hours to get the kids over to the fields, and, because one thing goes up because to accommodate additional trips,
Right.
and yet the number for extra hours perhaps for overtime goes down. So those two things aren't related?
It's all related. The reason we kept that extra hours and overtime flat is one of the new contract elements puts, if a driver is earning a certain rate of pay that is more than $27, they're now capped at $27. So because of that limitation on how much they're paid, we were able to keep that flat. So we're assuming really the same number of trips going forward, but you're not seeing a cost increase in that line because of that new contract language that sets a maximum rate for those extra trips. So again, they're estimates, Charmaine, in terms
Right.
of how much we'll be spending. We could, because we're lowering that substitute rate potentially with the action the board takes tonight, that number could actually be a little bit lower, but we've put a conservative cushion in there, again, not knowing the full extent, you know, as that plan is laid out.
Right, no, I understand they're all estimates. So I just want to double check, because I thought I just heard you say that the number of trips may, did you say decrease?
No, we've assumed that it's going to be about the same in terms
Okay.
of the number of trips. Normally, even if you had the same number of trips, you'd have an increase in your costs because.
No, I understand that.
Right.
So, but you say the number of trips may stay the same, but won't we need additional trips to get kids out to the other fields?
And that's what I've provided for within that field reconstruction-related
Right,
line.
I
So
see
I've just
that.
combined it in with the substitutes.
Okay. But the overall number of hours will not necessarily increase to accommodate those trips? That's my question.
Well, I mean, you're taking the students away from
Right.
the school, so yeah, you will have a slight uptick in
Okay.
those hours, and that's part of what would be driving that cost increase.
Okay. And then on the slide 21, which is the one right behind that, no, you had it right there. Go back to where it had all the, no. Right, that
Chairman,
one, correct.
Chairman, can we just break now? It's 9 o'clock. I want to
Okay.
let the students go.
Okay.
It's 9 o'clock, so the participation in government students, we'll take a 5-minute break so you can come in and sign up, sign out. We'll sign your sheets. If you'd like